Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the BuzzStream podcast. I'm your host, Vince Nero, and today I'm thrilled to be talking with Olivia Bence, the head of digital PR at Bring Digital. How you doing, Olivia?
I'm good, thank you, Vince. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat to you today.
Yeah, so Olivia and I met at Brighton probably almost a year ago. We were on a panel together. We're recording this in April. I'm headed to Brighton next week. We're headed there, so looking forward to it. Olivia, are you going to Brighton this year?
Not this year, so it's my first kind of year not going, so I'm a bit jealous. But some of my team are going, so I'm excited to hear kind of their take on all the talks and what the biggest topic's going to be in Brighton this year.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of ties together into kind of some of the stuff we want to talk about. Just we were speaking a little bit before this, the kind of tumultuous nature of the industry these days. There's always something new coming out, new themes. One of the themes we want to talk about today is relevant links, relevancy in general, pitching relevant journalists. It seems to be a hot topic. So I'm jazzed to get into chatting with Olivia about that. But before I do, I just want to remind everybody to like and subscribe, share this stuff with your friends, comment, rate the podcast, all that good stuff. It helps me bring on great guests like Olivia. Thanks. All right, Olivia, let's get into it. I first want to just kind of start. Can we talk about Bring Digital a little bit, tell people about what you all do, where you're based, all that good stuff?
Yeah, of course. So we are an award-winning digital marketing agency based in the heart of Manchester. So we actually launched in 2012. So we are 13 years old and we specialize in helping e-commerce businesses grow with that kind of high-performance campaign. So we specialize in things like organic search, paid socials, affiliates, digital PR, SEO content, all that kind of jazz. But we kind of specialize in that e-commerce area.
Yeah, awesome. So full service, you're kind of just a piece of the wing or a piece of the puzzle. I'm curious how kind of integrated an agency like that is and the digital PR wing. I know some of the agencies are very kind of segmented, but tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting you actually bring that up because that is actually a point of discussion that kind of the agency is looking at for this year and how we can integrate those services and just optimize results for clients. So, for example, if we get a paid client, how can we integrate them into digital PR, SEO, and things like that? So we're currently testing and trialing it with a few clients at the moment, kind of having that holistic approach. So I think we live in a society now where people go onto the news, they see something, they then might pop on social media, see their favorite influencer or someone talking about that. Then they'll go and search it and they'll get targeted by a paid ad. So can we bring that all together and to kind of bring this holistic campaign to life? So we definitely are becoming a lot more integrated as we go on, I think previously. And I think it's just natural. I think all agencies become very siloed in their services. They do a fantastic but we really kind of want to diversify and become a lot more integrated.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it does seem to be all about the brand building and kind of brand awareness these days. Well, okay, so we're talking about relevancy, relevant links. I think the reason that we decided to go down this path was you brought up this idea, and this was a few weeks ago, I think, at this point, maybe a month or so ago.
It was back in February. So funnily enough, it was Press Gazette that actually reported on this. And it was this Reach PLC journalist kind of have been warned against including links to third-party commercial websites without permission. So it actually supposedly got flagged because a freelance reporter was trying to add links to some not so great sites that you don't want to be linking to. So it kind of made it have a bit of a crackdown and have a look at where they are actually giving links out to. As you can imagine, this caused a bit of a storm within the digital PR world as a whole. There was some fantastic posts on LinkedIn, people giving their opinion, what it looked like. And I think when you start to see that kind of news, it's natural to kind of panic and think, oh my goodness, Reach PLC looks the likes of Daily Mirror. There's so many titles that they look after that you do kind of have that bit of a panic. However, there was no need to panic at that stage. They obviously did say that links that were added onto their kind of articles could only be to either Reach articles or their own web pages. But it didn't mean that all Reach PLC sites were kind of cracking down on this like link, not being able to give links. It just meant that it was a little bit harder. So it has mainly just been in the UK, but they do also have a US website. So the Mirror US, Daily Express US, and a few more. So from February to now, we have seen a bit of a shift in terms of them giving links. Like they only now seem to be only giving brand mentions or their own articles. So when it got sort of launched, I think it just kind of ignited this really interesting conversation within the industry about going away from those like vanity metrics in like number of links that we're securing and kind of really honing in on those like relevant links. What are the links that are going to be giving our clients the most impact? So I think it really sparked that interesting conversation. So while at the time it may have seemed like a really negative thing to happen, I think it sparked a really interesting and positive conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I do recall a lot of people talking. I mean, it brought up to light the idea of like the unlinked brand mentions and how relevant unlinked brand mentions are still impactful. I'm curious if you've seen any either studies that you've done internally or studies externally on the impact of something like that, like an unlinked brand mention.
So it's something that we are actually going to be starting bringing into our reporting when we report with clients, because like you mentioned, there is still that value of a brand mention in terms of studies and kind of having that impact of relevant links versus non-relevant as well. There isn't anything from my understanding that there's out there that has been a study to showcase that in a little bit more detail. But back in sort of May 2024, there was a leak by Google, which revealed those like mismatched links are kind of being ignored. So basically, obviously, Google, like they do, ignore those links that come from within content that's not relevant. So there's that kind of mismatch there. And as part of that's like Google's algorithm, we know how important EEAT is for a website to rank. And obviously that importance of having experts discussing relevant topics. But there is a lot of discussions around the value of brand mentions and the importance of relevancy. I would say sort of Digital Loft, in my opinion, are kind of leading that way with these types of discussions. So in a long-winded answer, Vince, there isn't anything that I've seen from a study point of view. However, that doesn't mean to say that there won't be in the very near future, because I do feel that PR agencies and digital agencies aren't already, relevancy will be a very key KPI, I think, that will start to come into our workforce.
Yeah, totally agree with you there. And I apologize for kind of jumping. I kind of split our talk there from try to make a transition into relevancy. And I think, yeah, let's kind of make sure these are segmented things. So it's like brand mentions. There's definitely stuff in that Google leak that I think speaks to the brand mentions and their impact. And even something, Olivia, you and I were talking right before this. There was an article I was just reading about the Independent publisher. The Independent was saying they've been doing these like AI generated summaries of news articles now. And a study, again on the Press Gazette, said that the Independent was claiming that users liked these AI summaries. They engaged with them more. They were showing up on Google Discover. And their whole reason for doing this was because they're trying to combat AI overviews, right? Because people seem to want that kind of quick summary of an article. They don't want to read a 2,000-page article or 2,000-word article. And to me, I think the power of the unlinked mention and a brand mention is it can actually get you, like if your brand is the story in a lot of those cases, like you will show up in these summaries. If people are talking about your brand, you're going to show up. It might not be linked, but like if it is about you rather than just like you've inserted yourself in via expert commentary or something, like if the story is about you, you're definitely going to be more likely to be included in these summaries. So that's where my head is at these days with like the idea of a brand and building a brand. I don't know if you have any takes on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's almost like we're going back to kind of that traditional way of doing like PR and like that brand awareness. I think it's so true. I think you spot on. If you go into kind of like a media site or a news site that you're really invested in and you value their opinion and the stories that they read, and you see a brand that they mention, I mean, I don't know about others, but I would potentially then go and search that brand and say, oh, okay, I'm quite interested in what you've spoken about. That again is that kind of organic search, driving traffic back to the website. Obviously, we can't attribute it to that specific article, but I know there's really big discussions around like brand awareness and like how we can actually report on that in a specific way. But I do think that there's some element of having a brand mention in like a top tier, really trusted news site that has that link for like trustworthiness and getting that brand awareness and organic search 100%.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's transition a little bit into the relevancy thing, because I think that plays into all of this. Unlinked brand mention or a link, if you're getting mentioned in a place or you're creating content that isn't relevant to your brand, this doesn't seem to be something that's going to necessarily help you out in the long run, right? Especially now. I feel like maybe in the past you could spin out a lot of articles. You could get mentions in as many. It was more of a scale thing. You just get as many mentions as possible. Whereas now it seems like we're learning more and more the power of these relevant links. So the question I think I usually come back to with this is like, is the problem that people are creating irrelevant content? Like I am a student loan site and I'm creating something that doesn't have to do with student loans? Or is it the problem that they're pitching journalists who aren't relevant?
It's a really interesting question. I think it's a bit of both, but I think there's a fine line between creating like that relevant content. So if I go kind of like that approach first and then go and jump into like those kind of like relevant journalists, I think obviously there's always that question of how far can a brand go before it's just considered completely irrelevant. And I was listening to a really interesting discussion about this with Giselle Navarro, and they were having that discussion about relevancy and irrelevancy. And she was talking about how many brands have like been built on the shoulders of adverts that were irrelevant. And she was talking about, for example, and it really kind of struck a chord with me because I thought I completely agree with this. And she was kind of talking about how like Red Bull, they could have advertised themselves on the taste and the energy that they gave, that it gives you, but they kind of went down the route of it gives you wings, and they were kind of looking at that bigger picture. And now we associate Red Bull with all these extreme sports.
Right.
What they're doing, they've gone bigger. However, if you were going to go and pitch that to an SEO agency, they would have been like, no, absolutely not.
We want to have a guy jump from the stratosphere. Yeah.
Like, where's the keyword? Where's the relevancy? Where's the keywords? What are you ranking for? It would be cool. Yeah. So I think there's like a really fine line. You obviously, from a digital PR perspective, like want to create content that sparks a conversation, is interesting, but also has that light relevance, and that we are getting links back to either a relevant page, relevant keywords, that we can get them ranking for things. So when people are searching for specific key terms, that can be in the SERPs. But we have to be flexible and have a bit of an approach that we have to be a little bit broader. We did it recently for a client who are a digital sort of payments provider. So they provide terminals in shops. So when you go and tap your card, like they provide those terminals. So a very niche client, and potentially maybe not so many topics that we could go for that would be getting links in national titles and,
Right.
And so we had to create a bit of a trusting relationship with them in order for us to be able to go a little bit broader for them. And we did a campaign during the Euros, like predicting how many number of pints were going to be drunk during the Euros and how much money was going to be spent. Some people might listen to this podcast and think that's completely irrelevant. And that's completely irrelevant. However, we're able to get coverage and links not only in nationals, but key trade titles with their target audience. And we had that relevancy in there for them, which they were really happy with. So I think there's always that fine line of relevancy from a digital PR and SEO perspective. But then I think flipping that and talking about like the journalists and people pitching to irrelevant journalists, since COVID, it has just been, I think, horrendous for journalists. I think I spoke last year in my Brighton SEO conversation that we're seeing mass redundancies. We're seeing people go more freelance. We're seeing people that we've had really close relationship with who are stuck to one specific topic now having to cover a number of deaths. So it is probably becoming a bit more like reoccurring that people are pitching to these people, assuming that they're still covering that kind of one topic and they're not, and kind of annoying them. We tend to be something that I'm never going to cover. So there's definitely that within that kind of question, like we have to be able to take the time to be able to build those relationships with those journalists again, find those relevant contacts, kind of really get to know what they're writing about. I say to my team that when we're putting ideas together for clients, let's trial an idea with a key contact of ours at a media site and see if they like it or not.
Oh, no.
Because then we're getting that key insight. So we're not sending the journalist irrelevant stuff. And we know that we're sending stuff to a client that we know the media are going to be interested in.
Yeah, I really like that kind of pre-vetting these ideas with journalists. It's probably one of the better reasons to build relationships with journalists as well, right? Being able to vet them.
100%. I say it's great to have that little black book of contacts of journalists that you have spent time building those relationships with, that you're able to help them and they can help you. I always say like to my team, and when I first started out, I remember ringing up news desks all the time, pitching surveys and stories. That is long gone now. Like that is absolutely gone. And it is now a lot more targeted in your approach to pitching to journalists. And I think the more that you can showcase to them that we want to help, like we want to make your job as easy as possible, the more you can get out of it as well. So yeah, if we can pre-vet, I'm always like, do it. Obviously, we don't always get the opportunity, but if we can, we do that.
Yeah. I want to jump back before we get into the relevant journalist thing too. I want to jump back to something you said about the content ideas and kind of the strategy behind it. I think like some of the challenges that people run into here is this idea that like my audience is everybody, right? So like it's okay for me to do a piece of content that will resonate with my audience, but you might not get links from relevant places. Like even the Red Bull example, right? Like I think that's probably an example there where they're getting in front of their target audience through kind of non-relevant content, or irrelevant content. So is it just about kind of creating a balance between this is content for them and this is content for SEO? Like what is that?
Absolutely.
That mindset? Yeah.
It's interesting you bring it up. We had a recent kind of discussion like that with another client of ours, and they wanted to get into like these like super like targeted, like very niche titles. And we said, okay, we can certainly create a bit of a strategy we can get into those titles by creating content that sits well for them. However, that SEO side of things are kind of more of a case of we needed to improve their backlink profile. We're not going to be able to improve their backlink profile if we're just going to be targeting those really niche titles. So I think there is absolutely a balance. So what we kind of did is kind of put it down into like 20% of our activity will focus on trade for X, Y, and Z, or these niche titles. 80% will be focused on a backlink kind of activity where we go a little bit broader and we create content that's going to be that the sort of consumer will be more interested in. Now, granted, sometimes that approach doesn't always work and clients are adamant that they don't want to go as broad as possible. And that can always be a little bit of a challenge and a little bit of a struggle. But I think the more you work with them and the more that you build that relationship and give them that kind of more, that insight and almost like an education for them, sometimes not always, sometimes they do kind of break those barriers down and allow us to have that freedom to create that kind of interesting consumer content.
Yeah. I mean, it is strategy, like is the perfect strategy in your mind the content that straddles both, or is it just a matter of like we should just kind of differentiate and lean into the stuff that's going to be far reaching and this is going to be the stuff for SEO? I mean, does it matter?
Yeah. If I was speaking for myself, I would absolutely love content that goes to all the nationals. We have all this conversation, like it's massive. It goes everywhere. Like that is always the dream. But not speaking like from my head of department kind of head on, I think that kind of dream content is one that sits with the client's KPIs. Like what is it that they want to achieve? And if it is that it's just going and getting a piece of coverage in Builders Monthly, the top niche tag, then we'll do that. And that if they're happy with that, then that's a dream. Obviously, vice versa. If it is that they want to be big and massive, again, we'll go and do that content that will do it for them. So I think it really does depend on the client's objectives.
Yeah. That seems to be the takeaway too from most of the people I talk to. It's just like, if you're an agency, it depends on what the client wants. Obviously, you want to do what the client, what is going to be most beneficial for the client, but like, you also can't be fighting them if they want something very specific, right? So I guess let me flip it. Say you started oliviabence.com, you sold eyeglasses. What strategy would you take?
Oh, wow. I think the strategy that I would take for me would be start small to start with, where we want to get a consistent amount of links. We want to build that trust. We want to build that kind of awareness in the media. I want to get like a good platform in the media where we get journalists coming back for comments, coming back for products, coming back for everything. And then I think once I've got that kind of consistent background, I'd go big. And I'd be like, right, time now, let's do like a big national campaign. I've already made my mark. People know who I am. So I think that's always a difficult thing is if from a brand perspective, if they're kind of new and not many people know who they are, it's very hard sometimes, not all the time, to do these like big national campaigns when journalists or consumers haven't even heard of them, because it always, I think, kind of puts the questions in journalists' minds saying, okay, this is a great campaign, but why should I cover them? I don't know anything about this.
Right.
I think so I've almost gone back on what I said before, but I think it's important.
That's a tough question.
Yeah, start small, get the media to know you, get consumer trust, and then go big.
Yeah. And it's one of those like SEO, it depends types of questions for sure, because you could ask another journalist and they'll be like, I don't care. Like if it's a story's a story, I don't care about the brand. And that might be the case. Like sometimes we do see these no-name brands kind of pop out of nowhere with some really creative, crazy campaign. But I agree with you. Like it's hard to kind of build a strategy off of let's just go big from 0 to 100 Yeah, I agree. Olivia, let's switch a little bit into the relevant journalist thing, because why that does kind of tie into content relevancy and relevant links, I think it's probably a slightly different conversation, but obviously like getting to relevant journalists will also get you those relevant links. But I think there's a lot more kind of moving parts to identifying relevant journalists and workflows and that sort of thing. So let's get into a little bit of that for this kind of last portion of the talk. But can I ask you kind of straightforward, like what are your workflows for finding relevant journalists?
Yeah, absolutely. So we use Rox Hill. So that's kind of like our media database service that we kind of start with. I've used loads of other ones like Volcana. Some people might use some other ones. But that kind of our first space is starting to find client, and we'll build our like databases from there. We may also use X, or I know Blue Sky is one that's kind of emerging at the moment for journalists kind of going from X to there. So we'll keep our eyes on those two platforms for any new contacts that we might not have found in our original kind of investigation. And then we're always just kind of keeping our eyes peeled. So we do a sort of like daily reactive newsletter, me and my team,
Oh, cool.
that our like clients can jump on any industry update we need to be aware of. And through that, we'll find relevant journalists that we can add to our media lists. And then obviously we use BuzzStream for our outreach. So that's how we we contact these journalists.
Right. Yeah. I've heard more and more of that kind of approach where you're doing like the targeted, like smaller approach, and then kind of peppering in on the back end is like not broad, but like you use a media database to kind of target these. I want people in travel. When you do that, like I assume when you're doing kind of the targeted approach using X and that sort of thing, like manual outreach, you're getting really specific about certain features of the journalist. Like, what do you look at in the journalist to determine if they're relevant?
Yeah, so what we'll tend to do is, I think everyone kind of in the industry might use it, but we'll do the hashtag journey request on X. And sometimes maybe put like journey request lifestyle, journey request travel, and we'll go through and just have a look and see what's like, who's the most recent and also who is actually a journalist, because sometimes it does take a little bit of going through. There's a little bit of rubbish on there, so it takes a bit of time to the ones that you want. And what we'll tend to look at is what they're tweeting about. So they may put like a request out that they're on the lifestyle desk for the Metro, for example, and then wanting stuff to do with travel, fitness, health and beauty, that kind of thing. If we spot that and we have a client that's relevant for those services, what we'll then tend to do is do a bit of an introduction email. So we may have multiple clients in all those different sectors that journalist is writing about. So we'll send her a bit of an intro email telling her which clients we're working on, what we can provide for her. So whether that's expert commentary, a campaign that we've worked on, survey data, we'll send it across to that journalist. And that's kind of how we kind of filter it out in terms of who we want to target.
Yeah. So you're kind of using it as a like opportunistic kind of search. Like you're not using it to say, go into the advanced search and find me people who say that they're a travel journalist in their bio, right? Like you're just looking for people who are doing the journal requests.
Yeah, and we'll do a bit of both.
Got it.
I think that X is quite good at it. So we'll do probably a mixture of both, and then they also kind of put their when they've got a promotion or they've changed jobs. I think to strike while the iron's hot. So we had it recently where a journalist had been promoted to like a lifestyle editor at a big national publication, and we got in touch with her and said, congratulations, working on X, Y, and Z. She came back, really wanted some more information, and we got a link live within 24 hours of us just contacting her to say, well done. I say her.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
That approach works really well, but yeah, you are right. We do a bit of both, but primarily we do it kind of manually instead of kind of by advanced search.
Yeah. When you're looking at a media database, how much you dig into things like their bio and filtering to make sure, because that is the kind of the biggest gripe that I feel like most people have on both sides. Journalists are like, I'm getting all these irrelevant pitches because I'm probably on some list that says I'm a travel journalist when I'm really a very specific type. I only cover travel in France or something.
Absolutely. So we will filter it down. So when I first started in my career in PR, I'll never forget the piece of advice that I got from my manager at the time. And they said, spend the most time building your media list and really look at it again. Because once that is done, it is done. You don't have to think about it. But there is nothing worse than when you go out to these journalists. And this was back in the day. I don't know if journalists still do it now. I know they still kind of ran a little bit on X, but this is when they would call people out on their own X.
Oh, yeah.
Some emails and put them on. And that was back in like the real early days. Like, yeah. And they just said, just spend the most time. You could spend an hour to 2 hours building this media list, and then it's there, and you can just keep going back. So I kind of give that message to the team. So when we use these platforms, there's loads of filters that we can use. So for example, if we're going to do a travel campaign, we'll filter it by what kind of like media area we want it to be, whether it's like national, consumer, trade, TV, radio, etc. Then we can go into the angles or the areas, so we can really get nitty gritty there by saying, right, we just want travel journalists. We can also put that we just want them to be in the UK. We can put date ranges and when they've last written their last articles. It's mad how many filters that you can go into where you can just be very, very niche with that. So that's what we tend to do as a first point of call. Then once the media list has been built, I'll get the team just to check it. And just because obviously you need that kind of human interaction with things like that because things can be missed and things can be popped in that we didn't realise. So I just get them to check it again and also add any relevant journalists that might not have been picked up in that initial first stage. So I do try and make sure that we be as strict as we can be. So we're not targeting irrelevant journalists, but things do happen. Things get slipped and sometimes you might target someone that says they're a travel journalist, but new roles in the last week updated. That can always happen.
Yeah, those are the pitfalls, I think, with the media database, the moving, the outdated information. We've been working pretty hard with like a new tool to kind of help with some of that. But yeah, a little sneak peek. But I think that is kind of the problem with the industry. It seems like right now, like you were saying, back in the day, people would even rant about this is a bad pitch. I just don't even I think journalists get probably so many bad pitches at this point or irrelevant pitches. They don't even have the time to work through it or the willpower. Yeah. Okay. So we talked a little bit about relevant journalists. I think one other question that comes up a lot is this idea of like, if you are kind of niching down, right? Like you have a very specific campaign that you want to get in a specific industry. I think the tendency is I can't just send 20 emails out. I need to send at least 100, 200 because how am I going to hit my client goals? Do you find that you have to hit a certain number, volume in order to hit these goals? Because I think that probably causes a lot of the stress to like volume is, I have to scale this when really it could take just 5 emails of really dedicated list building to reach the people you need.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think for us, we always prioritize that targeted approach. So like we've had an example where we sent it to one journalist and they have syndicated. Obviously, syndication quite tricky conversations. Some people love them, some people absolutely hate them. But yeah, they syndicated it across their whole like kind of like network, and we got a lot of coverage from that, and a quite a good amount of follow links from that as well. And that was just a case of sending one email. But I think as the industry as a whole, it's so hard to tell all the time. Like one technique works for one campaign, whereas another technique might work for another. I always try and avoid that kind of volume of amount of like email that we need to be sending for a campaign, because I think sometimes it can just get lost. What we're trying to say can get lost because we're trying to send out 200-300 emails, and that just gets like a bit ridiculous. And I think like, especially when luckily I haven't had many clients like investigate how many emails are being sent. I have had in the past 1 or 2. And I think that's just, when that happens, it's always just that education side of things that let's go to those kind of like journalists that we know are going to be interested in that campaign. If it's 5, it's 5. If it's 10, it's 10. Great. Let's see how we get on with that approach first. If that doesn't work, let's go broader. Let's go to the national news desks, the night journalists, the news editors, and go that way first. But yeah, second. But I think trying to target, let's send 300 emails, I don't always think is the best approach. Some people might differ. I would have to go for the shorter, more approach.
Yeah, I'm working on a piece right now. I finally got access to a lot of the BuzzStream data, user data, to be able to see things like send rate, bounce rate, all that kind of stuff. So I'm looking at campaign size, like volume size, compared to stuff like open rate and reply rate. And ultimately, hopefully if I can get this, like link rate, how much links and mentions and stuff, that's a little more manual digging. But the early data is basically there's a strong correlation between sending fewer emails and getting better replies, right? So, I mean, it's obvious, but it's nice to kind of see that for me to kind of confirm some of the things that I talk about. Because it's easy for me to preach, though, like, oh, less is more, targeted is more, but like agencies don't have the time, right? Like that time is money. So I get the reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say that'd be so interesting because I think as well it like sparks this like wider debate and conversation that I think just human nature, like we are obsessed with those that kind of like vanity metrics where it's like you sent 300 emails. That sounds amazing. That sounds great. Sounds so much better than saying, oh, I've only sent one email. Like it naturally does. So having that like data to back up that kind of one email that you send, it will be very interesting. It'll be very, very good to have.
Yeah. Yeah. That's maybe a good place to wrap up. I mean, I think I'd love to get your last thought on kind of where this is all going, right? So we've got relevant links are definitely important, but as you said, like things are changing, right? Like there's always a new next big thing in this industry. I guess, what do you think is going to be the next big thing in the digital PR agency? Like what is going to really be moving the needle in the future? I'm putting you on the spot here too, listeners.
Yeah.
I didn't prep Olivia.
No, but it's always interesting to think about. And I think kind of like that next step is we may start to see like a reduction in these kind of like massive link building campaigns where we see people creating like these big reports that we average to, that you see like 100 pieces of coverage. And I think we might go down that more like targeted route. I think relevancy and relevant like studies around the impact of relevancy will start to become a lot more popular. And I think we'll move away from those like vanity metrics. I think we already are starting to do that. It'll just be interesting to see. I think there'll be many changes, but I definitely think that kind of mass outreach, like those mass amount of links, will start to be reduced, and we'll be focused more on that kind of like targeted approach with relevant links, and that relevancy tools will become a lot more popular for digital PRs to use, I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that's 100% where we're headed with this stuff. And I think the overall brand, like right now, it's easy for me to say brand is going to become everything. But I think to your point, like being able to measure that in a more quantitative way, because that's branding, the brand in general, building a brand awareness is still a little bit of a murky kind of
It's so
metric.
murky.
Yeah.
It kind of also leads to that we are living in challenging times, and we will start to see, I think, if we talk about it from like a business perspective, we already get questions of why should we do marketing? Like marketing always has that kind of stereotypical way of being the service that gets cut the first because we need to save costs, always does. And as we're going into those challenging times, I think there will be more of a focus on reporting on that impact. Like we are doing a fantastic job. We are making changes, like we're getting you in that right direction. Like I think that will become a lot more of a focus because probably we'll start to see more questions being asked around like marketing and budgets and things like that. So yeah, I think that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, love it. Well, Olivia, it's been great chatting with you today. People, if they want to connect with Olivia, have any questions about any of this stuff, obviously the comments on YouTube and Spotify and whatnot, but Olivia is active on LinkedIn. You can check her out there. I'll be sharing all this on the BuzzStream blog. And just another quick reminder, please like and subscribe, comment, rate and review the podcast. The more you can do that, the more I can have great guests on like Olivia, sharing her great info on relevancy, link relevancy, finding relevant journalists, everything relevancy related. Olivia, it's been great chatting. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for having me, Vince.